Which option best summarizes paragraph 4? Now, paragraph 4 is a voluminous paragraph, but it makes a few key arguments. It starts by saying, at last we can confront directly the primary reason why school is difficult. It is difficult first because much of the material presented in school strikes many students as alien, if not pointless, and the kinds of supporting context provided for pupils in earlier generations has become weakened. It is difficult second because some of these notational systems, concepts, frameworks, and epistemic forms are not readily mastered, particularly by students whose intellectual strengths may lie in other areas of approaches. Then an example is given. Let's skip that. And it is difficult in a more profound sense because these scholastic forms of knowing may actually collide with the earlier extremely robust forms of sensory motor and symbolic knowing, which have already evolved to a high degree even before a child enters school. So because of these reasons, school or learning in school is difficult for students. That is the key idea. Let's look at the options. A says, the difficulties faced by students in learning subjects is due to faulty material, vague epistemic forms, and different approaches to knowing. This is altogether distorted. Starts off well. The difficulties faced by students in learning subjects, so the primary reason why school is difficult, that is relevant, is due to faulty material is completely outside the premise because the material in school strikes students as alien, maybe pointless, but that doesn't mean that the material is faulty. So this is an extreme distortion, an extreme exaggeration. Vague epistemic forms mentioned here, and different approaches to knowing. Other areas of approaches mentioned here, these also are completely distorted because these are not reasons, not like this. They are not reasons why school is difficult. School is difficult, or learning in schools is difficult for students because some of these notational systems, concepts, frameworks, epistemic forms are not readily or easily mastered, particularly by students whose intellectual strengths may lie in other areas of approaches. If you look at the example, for example, students with strengths in spatial, musical, or personal spheres may find school far more demanding than students who happen to possess a text-friendly blend of linguistic and logical intelligence. So simple, most school learning or most school teaching depends on the text format, the logical format or the reading format, the language-based format. But then there are students who are very good with music, who are very good in their own personal learning spheres, who learn better with actual physical objects. They are not very text-friendly. There are so many diseases, not diseases, but then conditions like dyslexia, where students have problems reading. If they have a problem reading, it is not that they are unable to learn or they are stupid. It's just that they have a problem with the linguistic mode of learning. So they don't understand. It's not that they don't understand the overall education that is being taught. It's just that they don't understand the medium in which they are being taught. It is almost like, to use a very known example from a very known movie, it is almost like they are being taught in Japanese. If they are being taught in Japanese, doesn't matter how profound the material that they are taught is, the language is all wrong. They can't speak the language, so they will learn nothing. That's the key idea. So both of these last 2 points, vague epistemic forms and different approaches to knowing, these are problems, but they're not presented in this way. They're not worded in this way in the passage. So this option is very much distorted. A is incorrect. Option B says, the difficulties encountered in school is due to the alien nature of material or technical matters and inconsistency between preschool and after-school education. This started off well. It says the difficulty encountered in school, relevant to the first line of the 4th paragraph, something we had in A as well, is due to the alien nature of the material. This is also quite close. Much of the material presented in school strikes many students as alien, if not pointless. But then it says material on technical matters. Why only technical matters? We are also not talking about technical here. We're talking about linguistic and logical intelligence, not necessarily technical. And inconsistency between preschool and after school education. Now, preschool, After school education, quite true. To say preschool education in itself is a slight distortion, because it is not education that has been given to the students preschool. It is different forms of knowing, forms of learning. We can see that here, extremely robust forms of sensory motor and symbolic knowing, which have already evolved to a high degree even before a child enters school. So saying preschool education, after school education is perfectly fine. Preschool education, a bit of a distortion itself. And then again, inconsistency between preschool and after school education is, if we look at the phrase altogether once, the difficulties encountered in school is due to, skip the matter in between, due to something and inconsistency between. So this makes the inconsistency definitive when the passage speaks about it in a potential way. And it is difficult in a more profound sense, because these scholastic forms of knowing may actually collide with the earlier extremely robust forms of knowing. So the inconsistency might exist, might not. It is not definitive according to the passage. So there is also a major distortion in this part. Hence, B is incorrect. We can eliminate B. Option C tells us school is found to be difficult by the students because of the inability to relate to subject matter presented in the absence of a relative backdrop, specific bents of mind towards different streams, and discord between different kinds of knowing a child is exposed to. This is quite relevant. This is overall completely relevant. School is found to be difficult by the students. First line. Why? Primary reason why school is difficult. Why is this? Because of three reasons. We see that first, second, and then more profoundly, a third in the more profoundly in the last statement, we have three reasons given why, the primary reasons why school is difficult. We find first, because much of the material presented in school strikes many students as alien, if not pointless. In other words, there is an inability of the students to relate to the subject matter presented in the absence of a relative backdrop. Relative backdrop is a bit of an assumption, but we can understand it from this line. And the kinds of supporting context provided for pupils in earlier generations has become weakened. So that is also true. The backdrop of learning, that is not there, and that is why the new knowledge may be presented to many students, may feel like alien, if not pointless. And that is why the students are unable to relate to the subject matter. Unable to relate to the subject matter because it feels alien or pointless. Specific bents of mind is the second one, towards different streams. So yes, it is difficult. Second, because some of these notational systems, etc., are not readily mastered, particularly by students whose intellectual strengths may lie in other areas of approaches. So they have different specific bents of mind. They are not necessarily geared towards, their minds are not geared towards the learning that is being given in schools. And that is why they may find school difficult. And third, discord between different kinds of knowing a child is exposed to. Discord between different forms of knowing, which is these scholastic forms of knowing may actually collide with, contradict, hence discord between the earlier extremely robust forms of knowing, which have already evolved to a high degree even before the child enters school. So knowing a child is exposed to before the child enters the school. We do see that there is one problem here, the same problem as option B, which is this is presented as definitively, and same here. It is school is found to be difficult because of something and discord between. So it doesn't say that there might be discord between. So there is that one problem. Otherwise, this option is really good and really direct and strong option. Let's see if we can find a better option in D, something that bridges that problem that we find in C. Otherwise, we would come back to C as the valid answer, as the only valid answer. D says, school is disliked because of the lack of sustaining milieu, a clash of opinions to which the child is exposed to by patterns of abstract imbibing of knowledge. Now, this we find is again extremely distorted. First off, school is disliked is outside the premise. School is difficult is what we are talking about. Not disliking, but being difficult. It being difficult. Because of a lack of sustaining milieu, because of a lack of a milieu is a social environment. We're not talking about a social environment. We're talking about pre-learning, because of which students might feel that the new learning, the new knowledge that they are trying to gain, it is alien, maybe pointless. So there's no aspect of a sustaining milieu, a social environment as such. This is also completely outside the premise. A clash of opinions, yes, very much relevant, because these scholastic forms of knowing may actually collide with earlier extreme robust forms of knowing which the child is exposed to. But why? By the patterns of abstract imbibing of knowledge. Where do we have abstract imbibing of knowledge? We have the linguistic and logical intelligence, or the linguistic and the logical model of learning in school education, and we have sensory motor and symbolic knowing in preschool education. Which of these can be called abstract? There's no reason to call any of these abstract. None of these necessarily need to be abstract. In fact, by the language, they seem to be quite substantial, quite tangible and physical, quite concrete, not abstract at all. So D is again distorted on many counts. We can eliminate D. So we find that despite that one minor distortion, C is still the most appropriate answer. That is the correct answer.